Hey, welcome to the webinar. Today's session is on business process automation made easy in SharePoint and Office 365. And for those of you who read the description, there's a ton of new stuff we have going on in the SharePoint world with the SharePoint Futures release that just was announced. So today we're actually going to be talking about flow and POWERAPPS, and as well these 5 steps to success around workflow and simplifying, making it made easy in SharePoint and Office 365. And with me today, I'm Joel Oleson, Director of Business Development at Konica Minolta Business Solutions, and I'm with Garrett Curtis from
Hi.
Infowise Solutions.
I'm a SharePoint developer with Infowise Solutions.
And Infowise is our sponsor for today. And we're really going to be talking about all things SharePoint workflow and forms. All right, good times. So I am your tour guide. I'm going to be the one who's walking through things today. Many of you may know me. I'm known as SharePoint Joel in the community. My blog is collabshow.com. I also have a travel blog called travelingepic.com. You can see a few of my SharePoint travels and travels to community around the world. I just recently returned from speaking at the Digital Workplace Conference in Australia and stayed with the tribe in Papua New Guinea for a few days. Had a fantastic time. Just love being able to get out and see the world, and especially connecting with SharePoint people everywhere. So the agenda for today, we've really kind of divided things up into 3 main pieces here. First off, we're going to kind of kick things off with helping you understand what's the current state of workflow and forms inside of SharePoint and Office 365. And as I talk about SharePoint and Office 365, really, it's cloud first, mobile first, and so things that are happening in the cloud space will eventually happen in SharePoint 2016, and that's the Microsoft commitment. We're hearing a lot about that, so I'll talk a little bit about that, and then some kind of things to help you in your migration from kind of legacy processes into digital, kind of a digital transformation, you could say, but more of a move to an effortless kind of business processes. And I'll talk through kind of 5 key things, like identifying low-hanging fruit, focusing on the things that matter, analyzing your existing business processes, kind of walking a document through and looking at user experiences. And ultimately, we're going to end this with Infowise giving a nice demo of a solution on top of SharePoint. And we will definitely save time for Q&A, even if we're up against the hour. Any questions that don't get answered, I will be publishing a Q&A as well on my blog, collabshow.com. So what's going on with workflow in SharePoint 2016? So 2016 has shipped. Hopefully a lot of you were able to attend the Future of SharePoint event. If you didn't, there's a ton of YouTube videos that are out now. In fact, we're actually going to see one of the videos on Flow and POWERAPPS a little bit later. I want to walk you through some of the kind of key announcements that relate to that. But this May 4th announcement of SharePoint was really a big commitment to the community that things are evolving, that this platform of SharePoint, that the team is really, really committed to SharePoint, and it was just a big, exciting day kind of talking about all sorts of the platform being evolved and doing these continuous updates, basically feature packs, releasing features on top of SharePoint. So SharePoint Server 2016, those of you who've kind of watched it over time, a lot of what was cemented with this May update, this May 4th update, is that SharePoint 2016 is really a foundational release. It was born in the cloud, delivered on-premise, hybrid at the core. It is the most comprehensive, validated, tested version, and that's because it is Office 365 in your own data centers. That's really what it is. It's SharePoint Online, but made for the data center. And the other exciting thing is they're actually going to be releasing features for that release. So basically, if you invest in SharePoint 2016 in that platform, you're going to be getting feature packs that will update the features in the product. Now, part of these announcements with SharePoint 2016, there were some kind of not so exciting things around InfoPath and SharePoint Designer. Both, InfoPath is dead. You've probably heard that over and over again. In fact, at the SharePoint conference, I think it was even back in 2014. That's how long ago it was. We had a funeral for InfoPath. It was a very, very sad day, very confusing day for a lot of people in the community. InfoPath 2013 and SharePoint Designer 2013 will be the last versions of those products. That continues to be confirmed. That being said, you can still use InfoPath 2013 and SharePoint Designer to work with SharePoint 2016. And InfoPath Form Services is included in SharePoint 2016. It's also continued to be supported in Office 365 today. So it's a very confusing story. Those of you who have been using SharePoint Designer and InfoPath, it's been a rough ride. In fact, InfoPath 2013 really is InfoPath 2010 under the covers. It's pretty sad. So all of that being said, there is the life cycle of those products will be supported until 2026, and I hope that we're not actually using them much longer at all. The most popular third-party product in SharePoint is Forms and Workflow, and that's the reality today. And I want to be able to position some of these updates and releases that Microsoft's been making around that. I want you to be able to understand reality check. There's a bit of a reality check of what's really going on in SharePoint. What are these new apps? What's happening? How do those relate to your SharePoint environment? So what is new? What has changed in SharePoint 2016? So let's start with today. If you were to install SharePoint 2016 today, you actually get Workflow Manager 1.0. Hey, wait, isn't that the same thing that was in 2013? Yes, it's exactly the same. So the workflow story, in a lot of ways, has not changed today, where basically you can be running your SharePoint 2010 workflows or your SharePoint 2013 workflows, which will be managed via that Workflow Manager inside of SharePoint. Not an exciting story. Microsoft has done many attempts at kind of addressing this. Fossil, which is the forms on SharePoint lists, which really didn't really see the light of day. They decided not to ship that. There's been some attempts at building Excel forms and Word forms, leveraging Access services. This doesn't necessarily work for most organizations. In fact, again, there's a lot of third-party work that's been done around even turning your Word documents or your PDFs into forms, which can then be leveraged in SharePoint as an example. That being said, Microsoft has been focused on addressing these, and rather than getting so focused on addressing forms and workflow in SharePoint, they've taken a much bigger, broader view. This kind of idea of let's build contextual apps where you work. And essentially two new exciting products that Microsoft's been working on. Both of them are in public preview. First one is called Microsoft Flow, and this is only a few weeks old. And what Flow is about is making it easy to mash up two or more different services. And some of you may say, oh, Flow, that sounds like workflow. Okay, before you put too much into that, I want you to kind of, there'll be a bit of a reality check around this. Flow is exciting. It is a new way of kind of looking at your services, and we'll be spending the next few slides around Flow. The next app is POWERAPPS, which is designed around building these robust applications, trying to make it easier and easier to make mobile apps and creating views of your data, not just SharePoint data, but all sorts of types of data, and building these kind of rich, fast, robust, I guess I shouldn't say too rich, but kind of simple, really, business applications for various devices. And you can go check both of those out today. Flow.microsoft.com, PowerApps.microsoft.com. And before you start saying, well, how much does this change my SharePoint world? Right now, these things are not even designed for on-prem. On-prem is part of the roadmap, but basically the first releases here will be working with Office 365 and SharePoint Online. But the plan, both of these things are on the roadmap for integrating with SharePoint. First in the cloud, second on-prem. So a little bit of look at flow, and this is the future. So we're looking here, peering in at the future. Right now, even if you have Office 365, you're not going to see this button. But basically, here we are looking at a future SharePoint site, and you can see right in the ribbon, or right in that Actions menu, we have a button, Add Flow. So this Add Flow basically allows us to build kind of this automation, a little bit of business automation, where we can say, when an item is added in SharePoint, we want to send out an email. So basically, we're trying to mash up Office 365, SharePoint Online with essentially the Outlook Online experience, the Office 365 mail experience. The other kind of way of looking at this is saying it's if and then. If a new member is added to MailChimp, then let's set up an email approval to add someone into a VIP SharePoint list. So you kind of get this idea that it's an if, do this, then do this, and you can even have approvals in that. Some other examples are things like, or what you might be building in this automation is notifications, synchronization, getting data, but integrating services. And it even goes more. So there's 35 plus services we're talking about here. Wunderlist, Twitter, Dropbox, Microsoft Translate, that's kind of cool. Dropbox, Box, Yammer, bunch of cool stuff. So as an example, if somebody tweets and it has this hashtag, I want to take this action. So this is kind of the level that Microsoft's looking at. And as you approach flow, I want you to kind of have that same kind of vision of, if you need to put this in perspective, it's really if and then, and let's take two systems and have it do these things. So it could be even if somebody saves something into their OneDrive, we actually need to see if that's something we should put in a team site. Let's kick this over to someone who can approve or validate it. I don't know who actually wants to see all that, but kind of one example. So a little bit more about flow. It's this concept of kind of working less, doing more, creating automated flows between your favorite apps, notification, synchronization, collecting data. A few more examples there. You see GitHub down there, Microsoft CRM, SQL. Some of you may even be surprised to see Slack. Some people have been saying, I'd love to integrate Slack with SharePoint. Well, flow is one opportunity to start saying, hey, if somebody adds something to our team site, let's go ahead and notify our group. Or, hey, if we're using Slack, let's go ahead and notify our group in Slack. So there are some scenarios here that Microsoft's thinking about in terms of, let's integrate the things where people spend their time. Let's automate some of those things that are time-consuming. When tweets come in, rather than having somebody sit there and culling all those tweets, let's push it into an Excel file, as an example. We are going to look at a video of this, assuming it's going to work. So let's go ahead and check this out. So there's an Add Flow button that's actually going to be integrated into SharePoint. And it gives you essentially a set of templates, internal objects as well as external. So as an example, with Salesforce, we want to actually push this into our big wins list. So here's an example of kind of that context of when something is received in Salesforce, we can actually create an item in SharePoint. We can then add conditions or actions. So we have a condition. So if the total amount of the deal is greater than $1 million, that's when we want to notify the operations team, give them a heads up, and then we can send a mail after we've created an item in SharePoint. product team is very excited about SharePoint and Flow because there's so many data sources out there. And Flow is actually coming to document libraries as well. So now we're actually going to introduce POWERAPPS. So we've got this big wins, these opportunities in Salesforce that are greater than $1 million. So POWERAPPS is around designing solutions for mobile. So we've got POWERAPPS, which is a little big wins app, mobile app. So we're actually seeing the SharePoint data available in the app. So he's added the Contoso logo. Here's the data from our list. Here we've got very lightweight approval here where we can assign leads and then click approve. So basically it's mobilized SharePoint through POWERAPPS. So we want to be able to create POWERAPPS even right from SharePoint. So if we go back to our SharePoint list, we've actually got a create PowerApp button right from the list, which will give the context of SharePoint to the PowerApp. We want to make it easy so people can consume it. It can be a view on a list or library or as a web part on a page. So with mobile intranets, that's why you'd want it. You'd want to have it on your intranet, right in the SharePoint app. And right in our links in the new mobile SharePoint app, our PowerApps will show up, like our new big win approval PowerApp. So it's pretty exciting stuff, and you just saw kind of a brief view right from this video that was just released from the product team, but I wanted you to kind of see that flow and how PowerApps can kind of build on top of that. So in this next section, we're actually going to be digging into PowerApps just a little bit more so you can kind of see what we're talking about here. I don't want to start at the beginning. 1 second, here we go. All right, so this is the roadmap around Flow. Basically, the plan is to have further SharePoint integration. The reality check is today, even the templates you're seeing right now, if you go to flow.microsoft.com, you sign up for this public preview, it's read support for SharePoint right now. And it's not even document libraries yet. So it's really kind of some very basic scenarios that you can start with. They're going to be adding support for new types of lists like people, even some columns and content types, where they'll be able to read and write to SharePoint lists. But the reality check is today it's extremely limited in this public preview, but as time goes on, there will be some more functionality into Flow. But I don't want this oversold as this is the answer to workflows in SharePoint for what you're building today. Flow really is around connecting disparate data sources for apps you're using today, integrating them in kind of simple way around those things we mentioned, like notifications and synchronization and those types of things. The idea as well is to be able to leverage your existing SharePoint workflows in Flow. So that's actually a key thing to understand is you may be building workflows that actually want to leverage Flow to be able to then work with other systems. So that may be an even better way of positioning how you're looking at Flow is it's an if-then, hey, if an item's added over here, then do that. Well, how great would it be if you had hooks to say, I want to set up the hook or create a hook so that Flow can pick it up and then send that data off to Salesforce or send that data off to Dropbox or, or vice versa. The data's coming in, it's creating items that you can then build and leverage with your existing SharePoint workflows. You can actually see what's been done by following that link. So there is actually, even inside of Flow, you can see some of the SharePoint-focused templates that exist today in the public preview. PowerApps. So why were PowerApps even built? The idea is there was kind of three major things. You can read more about this on their blog, but it was not enough skilled mobile developers. Essentially, they're finding that most companies there's so much market demand for mobile development, and that the development services are actually going to have so much more demand. It's going to be 5 times faster than an internal IT organization's capacity to even deliver them. There just aren't enough skilled developers. The other piece is around business data proliferation. So there's so much business data, so much that's actually beyond the firewall in these SaaS clouds stored in many systems, and it's difficult to connect and consume them. And if you wanted to have developers build those, the timeline and the difficulty and challenges of ramping people up and developers just aren't skilled in that kind of way. So POWERAPPS should help create, connect, and share apps across your team on any device in minutes. So that's really the goal here. And it's around IT agility and app sharing, mobile app distribution across the App Store. So basically, instead of having to push your data through the App Store, it is something that can be built, and it can be governed by IT, but it's also something that's much more frictionless. They don't have to be pushed into the Apple App Store. It's something that can actually be pushed by employees, but it is something that can be governed. Microsoft, I'm sure, has governance around this as well. And on the right, you can kind of see the beginning of when you start up POWERAPPS. You can say, I want to build this on a mobile phone or on a tablet, so that ought to help position this a little bit more. That's what this is about. This is about distribution through devices. So starting from a template, or starting from your list or your data, and then, or even starting from scratch. So here we are looking at the POWERAPPS UI. You can kind of see the tools side of things and being able to see the gallery and charts and cards and buttons in terms of that surface for being able to create your POWERAPPS. And we saw a little bit more of this in the actual demo. So that gives us a little bit about POWERAPPS, and I hope I've positioned that. What really these POWERAPPS is about is creating apps for your devices that will give you a view of the data. And it's integrated right into SharePoint. It will be. Basically, right out of your menus, you'll be able to create a Power App, which can then be leveraged as a view inside of SharePoint. So they don't even have to be on the device. They can actually be views and apps that are created through the SharePoint experience, connect to SharePoint, and make them more accessible for your organization. And you'll hear a lot more about this coming up. These are just both brand new apps. POWERAPPS has been out a little bit longer. In fact, some of the Flow stuff actually came out of early versions of PowerApp. So there's also some new things around the developer experience that relate to automation. First off, with SharePoint 2016, we're starting to hear more and more about this SharePoint framework, which is this new JavaScript-based framework. And Yeoman is this new set of scaffolding templates that can use when you're building your SharePoint apps, building kind of more of those client-based applications. The other thing we have is Gulp, which is designed around task and build for repetitive tasks, automating things like compression, minification, and there's a bunch of other plugins you can actually use to automate your development process. So again, this isn't necessarily automating SharePoint workflows, but it's automating SharePoint development for solutions you might be building. And one thing to also be aware of is with SharePoint 2016, there's so many more requirements around building servers. Wouldn't it be great if we had a solution for developers? Well, there's this thing called the SharePoint Workbench, which allows you to test web parts or applications on your client without even needing connection to a server. So that can definitely also help out in your solutioning. You're building your solutions and so on, your add-ins that you're building for SharePoint. So this next section is around these kind of 5 steps to being able to simplify your workflows. Now, around simplification, Einstein has this great quote, and I think that everybody really needs to have this in their brain as it relates to SharePoint, and especially with the stuff we just saw. because I think some people are going to go overboard. And that's really my caution to you, is to understand what is the right positioning for flow in your organization. What's the right positioning for PowerApps? Do we really want to put the business on hold thinking that flow is actually going to address a lot of our SharePoint workflow needs? The answer is no. I do think that it needs to be positioned properly. If we want to notify, if we're using it for notification, synchronization, those types of activities, then we're looking at flow in the right kind of way. If we're looking at flow and saying it's going to do business orchestration, if it's going to be, automating our business forms, today that's not a very good reality check for what you can be doing with your with flow and PowerApps. They're not designed for that. So that being said, and I think it's important for you to understand that that may be way out in the roadmap, but today that's not even the vision of what these apps are trying to do. They're not trying to automate your business. They're trying to make things that you do every day more simple. Hey, when tweets come in on this hashtag, we want to notify people, or we want to gather those and put them in an Excel file. So this quote, everything should be made as simple as possible but not simpler, is actually a really key thing to take, especially as we're looking at even a lot of our structured business processes. When we start saying what should be automated, what should be in SharePoint, I think a lot of it you've got to say, well, and we'll kind of look at this low-hanging fruit, but I think that's actually a key piece in understanding not making things more simple than they should be. Now, a lot of folks, when you start going around the organization, start saying, hey, we want to help you automate your business process. We're looking at what you're doing, and we think there's a better way. A lot of people are going to say, you know what, we're too busy to look at that. No thanks. And I think that part of the scenario is, to me, it's kind of, let's look at the low-hanging fruit. Let's see those business processes are things that we can actually look to take advantage of. Maybe you've just started with Office 365 and you're trying to say, we're not getting very good adoption. What are some business processes that we can actually look at today that can make a big difference to take advantage of the infrastructure that's been built for us? Or maybe you've been using SharePoint, it's that glorified file share, and you're saying, hey, we need to be doing a lot more with this. It's so much more powerful. Well, rather than starting with your structured business processes, let's look at some things that actually a simple workflow could do, like a vacation request form. Hey, place where the employees can go and request their time off, use a calendar picker, choose the time, choose the activity. Maybe if they're going to a funeral, or maybe they're spending time with their family or needing time off. There's a lot of different ways that it's a fairly simple request that does need approval. Maybe that approval is HR, maybe that approval is the manager, maybe it's both. But those are good examples of leveraging a business process that is going to help drive people to that business process. Time cards is another one. You want to capture what are people doing with their time. And there's a lot of kind of cool reporting you can do on the back end of that. But as well, being able to see how are people spending their time. There's some work that's already been being done in Office 365 around those types of reports in terms of how people are spending their time online in activities inside of Office 365. But being able to have a simple time card that you could then mobilize. You could essentially gather data of how people are spending time on their projects. HR onboarding is another really great one. You getting new employees, learning to use the technology, uploading their files, those things being automated in terms of where they're being stored and validated. It's a great opportunity for verification on the back end with that as well. There's opportunities for scanning and that kind of thing. But again, we don't want to start with the difficult things. We do want to start with the things that are kind of low-hanging fruit. Document policies, maybe training. I think it's different for different companies in terms of what are the things that today could be that much easier that it's an incremental kind of solution, something that makes it easier to use. The other thing that may be an opportunity to look at is what are things today that are manual that could be automated with something like a digital signature or an e-signature. So what do your approval processes look like today? So essentially identifying some of those might be a good opportunity. There's a lot of good integration with signature integration, and in fact Infowise has a solution that we'll be looking at as an example. But ultimately it's about kind of gathering data, analyzing existing business processes, looking at how the flows are working, looking at the processes today, looking how we can optimize those processes. Sometimes when you're actually you're starting out doing a flow, it's actually part of a bigger process, and you're analyzing it and saying, well, this is actually one piece we want to automate. You know, today it's a physical signature and somebody has to print it and then it has to be delivered to this person, and today this process is taking 2 to 3 days for it to be approved. But that reporting or the analysis of that, it may actually take some kind of walking through this and defining it. Now, as it relates to these kinds of things, it's very easy to get some analysis paralysis. And what I mean by that is it may take less time to build strategy A or strategy B versus actually analyzing whether strategy A or strategy B is more efficient. And it's funny how often I've seen that, where it's like, if you could have actually just made the decision, we would be done, we'd be using it by now. But instead we're spending way more time and money analyzing it. Now, the other thing that is opportunities here, especially in making things more simple and efficient, is looking at risk. What are some existing processes today where people are doing some things that are inefficient? Maybe it's being done via paper, and those, whether they're receipts or invoices or whatever, they're being lost. And that's time and money that's being lost as a result. It may be patient records that, or notes and that kind of thing, where today faxing, scanning, emailing, all those kinds of communications, they end up being a mess because they're in so many different places and it's spread out and no real way of kind of keeping your arms around it. With SharePoint Office 365 and SharePoint 2016, a lot of this data loss prevention that's actually going into SharePoint is a great opportunity to say, let's get this existing process and map this into SharePoint and use this as a great example that we can then use as momentum to then look at other existing processes. So from a risk perspective, as an example, this data loss prevention feature is gold. You know, it's really something that can help save time and money in a huge way. So one of the things that you've got to do is you can't just make assumptions. People may say, here's a printout of how our workflow works. You really do need to be able to walk a document through that process. You need to be able to see what that actually looks like. So as you're kind of mapping things out, there's a lot of kind of interviewing and sitting down with people and finding out how things are working today. But ultimately, you need to walk through it, understand who's involved, understand why they feel like they need to touch it and they need to actually physically sign it. And then you can actually say, what if we did X, Y, or Z? They can tell you why that wouldn't happen. And essentially being able to map out these processes, being able to kind of take it through the flow, it can really help in terms of, you understand these are the people involved. There may be some that need some retraining. Maybe some are kind of very anti-SharePoint or anti-Office 365. And you need to be able to find out, are they going to be okay with this? And even if you're just trying to say, no, you're going to do it this way, it's important to kind of walk through it so people are prepared. Make sure people understand this is going to make their life easier, And if they're saying, no, it's not, you understand why don't they think it's going to be. So a lot of it is kind of helping, saying what are some ways we can actually try and understand better how things are working today and how we can optimize. And we can actually create more willing buyers, essentially, of our organization by having them try out new things and saying, hey, I'd like to see, let's take this workflow. Let's do some prototyping. Do you like the way this works? Oh, I'd like to see it like this. This works for me. People, it's going to help kind of do some self-actualization for those people who are involved. They're going to love it a lot more if they can actually feel like they've been a part of the decision making, or at least feel part of the solution itself. And it is going to take people trying to do new things, and there's some of that old dog new tricks stuff going on, but ultimately I think you're going to find that your people are going to be more amenable to it if they feel like they're part of the solution. A lot of people want to automate their jobs or automate certain parts of their jobs, but they're going to be worried, hey, is my job going away if you automate it? For the most part, that's not the case here. What we're trying to do is optimize it so people can spend more time doing analysis and reporting and making smarter, faster decisions. And I think with all SharePoint solutions, there's people who can over-architect, and there's also people who would say, oh, SharePoint's the right hammer for every problem that comes up. That's not always the case. Sometimes it's the simple solution, sometimes it's not. And I think it kind of goes back to that Einstein quote of, let's make things simple, but not more than simple. You know, that, no, I'm not even saying it right. But we want to create things simple, but not more simple than it should be. And ultimately, our last one here is, again, it's kind of gathering the feedback, talking to users, because sometimes it may sound better than it actually is. This little grape, little orange and mango drink I had in Papua New Guinea, the buddy who was with me, he's like, what are you drinking? And it wasn't until I started looking and I was like, oh, yeah, what am I actually drinking? Yeah, this doesn't sound so great. But it tasted a lot better than it sounds. As part of your release of your workflow, there's the way you design it, and then there's the user experience. It's part of that reality check of, let's actually see how people are going to be using it. Part of the user acceptance testing and kind of that release management is, again, sitting with the users after we've actually developed the solution. And do you see a pattern here? The pattern is we need to be working with the people who are going to be using it most. Sometimes they're going to feel like, we haven't been trained, this has been shoved down our throats, we don't want to use it. Your best user acceptance and adoption is going to be from that little bit of touch that you do. The next time around, it's going to require so much less touch, and there's also going to be so much more trust that's actually part of your process. So with that, this next portion, I'm going to introduce Garrett Curtis. He's going to join us for a bit of a demo from Infowise.
All right, thanks, Joel. So my name's Garrett Curtis. I'm with Infowise Solutions. And let's just start out with what Infowise is. So it's a third-party solution that allows you to create effortless business processes straight from the user interface without any custom coding. So as a SharePoint developer, as an admin, you can use Infowise to put together a lot of these workflows and small processes and even big processes that Joel was talking about earlier, and give them to your users very quickly and with very little learning curve, really. So when I talk about Infowise, I'm going to be talking about the Infowise Ultimate Forms suite. And here you can see Ultimate Forms is really a suite of tools that extends various parts of SharePoint. So this is just a few of the places that Infowise Ultimate Forms touches. There's a whole lot of features. So today what I'm going to do is take you through sort of a very simple business process where we're going to create an invoice from time cards, essentially. So Joel, if you want to make me the presenter, or I can do that. Okay, great. So you guys should see my screen in a second here. Okay, so what we've got is SharePoint Office 365. This is just out of the box SharePoint plus the Infowise Ultimate Forms app. And this app also works, the app works for Office 365, but you can also download Infowise Ultimate Forms for SharePoint on-prem, and you can do that from our website. Okay, so let's get started here. So here we have an invoices list. It's pretty straightforward, but already you can see some of the Infowise enhancements that we have. So for example, the status, which is just a normal choice column, we've added icons to this so the users can quickly sort of get a sense for what each of these statuses means. And we can do other things like colored backgrounds and things like that if we wanted to emphasize certain statuses. Also, we have KPIs, key performance indicators. These are super useful for sort of tracking numbers. So in this case, we have a red payment status because we've set this invoice out a while ago and we were expecting to get paid, but we still haven't, so it's going to be red. Yellow means we're getting kind of close. So this is the kind of thing you can set up with the Infowise Ultimate Forms app. In fact, let's take a look at one of these invoices a little closer. Okay, so here's another great Infowise feature. You can break up the sort of long, boring SharePoint lists into multiple tabs. So this way you can channel users' attention where it needs to be. In this case, we only have one column, but really you could do two columns even if you wanted, or three or four. So here's an example of an invoice. It's very straightforward. We have an invoice ID, a simple date, our customer. Really what gets exciting though is we have a way to do relational sort of database almost. So we have this invoice item, but this invoice is made up of different line items, and those are actually a whole separate list. But using the Infowise associated items, we can actually add new line items directly to the invoice, and that way all of the sort of related information for this invoice is going to be tracked together. And using some other features, we can actually take data from the line items and collate them into sort of roll up totals and things like that. So in this case, the invoice total is really just a sum of all of the different line items that are on that invoice. And then finally, we have a very simple tracking system. So essentially, in this case, we needed a manager approval, and this is something you run into a lot, obviously, with paper workflows, where you have to get a signature before you can proceed. So in this case, we're using the Infowise approval item to add a actual hand-drawn signature to the workflow. And we can use logic to, depending on whether or not the signature is present or valid, we can either go forward or not go forward with the rest of the process. So let's take a look at actually adding a new invoice to the system so you can see how some of these logic things work. So I'm going to add a new invoice to the system. All right, right away you can see this is a very simple screen as opposed to the more complex one we saw before. So we use logic here to hide or show different tabs or even different fields based on where the user is in the process. So when we're making a new invoice, for example, we don't need to show the users the other fields, the line items or the workflow, because we're not quite there yet. So we're going to make a whole new invoice here. Give it a customer. There we go. Okay, so we've got a new invoice on our field, and now we'd like to go add some work to it. So let's change that date and make it due this Friday. Great. Okay, so now we can add a whole new line item real quickly here. So let's say we're going to do planning for projects. Just very simply, we can add costs and quantity here. So that costs $200, and we did this. We had 4 meetings. Great. Okay, so what we've done here is we've added a new item on the list items, or the line items, but it's actually associated itself to the invoice. So we don't have to do that from a different screen. We can do that all right from the form. Let's add a couple more just so we have some extra data here. Had lunch meeting. All right, then we'll do one more. Okay, great. I can't spell. Executed the project. All right, so there we go. We've got some new line items added to our invoice. So let's take a look at what that looks like on the main screen now. Okay, so we added some new items to our project, but we don't have a total yet, and that's because the action that updates the total runs after the item is saved. So if I reload this now, I should see our total. Great. Okay, here we are. So we have an invoice, and we use some of the Infowise Ultimate Forms features to make that very easy for the user. Now let's say we wanted to print this invoice because we want to send it to our customer. So we have a couple options. We're going to use the Infowise Smart Print. Previously what I had done was set up a nice invoice template. So from here what we can see is all of our pertinent details for the invoice. So based on the customer we selected, we pulled in the customer address, the payment terms, we set up the invoice date, and based on the payment terms, we calculated the payment due. Of course, who we're sending it to, and then this is really fun. So these are all of these associated lines that we added previously. They get to show up very easy to read here on this invoice. But of course this invoice by itself doesn't do us very much good. We need to actually add this to the item. And so this is where we start getting into some of the really neat Infowise Actions features. So what I could do if I wanted was from this nice invoice print, I could make a PDF out of it. And then that's going to give me the PDF, and I could go attach this as an attachment, but let's say we wanted to make that automatic. So what we're going to do in that case is we're going to add an Infowise action, and I'll show you how to do that. It's really simple. So from the invoices list, we have a new option here under settings, which is the Infowise design. So this is something that got added along with the rest of the Infowise suite. And if we go in here, this is sort of the control panel for all of the Infowise features. And you can see there's quite a lot of them. In this case, we're going to be talking about business logic, and we're going to add an automated action that's going to create the invoice printout and add it as an attachment to the item, all with one click. So in my actions screen, I'm going to add a new item, and you can see there's, I think, 16 different actions we can do with these items. A lot of them, things like send email or copy items, or we can import data from emails, things like that. These are things that Microsoft's doing now too, it seems like, with some of the things that Joel was talking about. In this case, all we're going to be doing is we're going to print items. And we'll call this action create invoice. Okay. And with our actions, you can trigger the actions based on events. So maybe the item has been added to the list or the item's been edited. In this case, what we're going to do is actually add a whole button. So it's going to be a manual execution. So the users can go and click a button, and this will trigger the action. And as you can see, as I'm configuring this, all of this is done through the user interface in SharePoint. There is no custom coding. It's just point and click. It's really simple. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to print my invoice template. I'm going to export it to a PDF, and I'm going to target that item into as an attachment. Other options, I could email it, or I could add it to a document library in SharePoint. Okay, now I'm going to tell it what the file name is. In this case, I get to use sort of dynamic values, if you will. So from this option here, I can go and choose the name of the document. So I'm going to use that invoice ID, which is a unique ID that each invoice has. It's very simple. Okay, and finally, I just have to tell it which item to apply the action to. So in this case, I want to apply the action to the item that I have selected. So it's very simple. I just add a condition here that says the ID is the active ID. All right, great. So I've got that action created, and here I've got it in my actions list. So let's go back to our site. Okay, so here's our new invoice. Let's see here. Very good. Okay, so either from the view screen, or if I go to the context menu, let's go to the view screen. I can run an action, and there's our action, create invoice. So what this is going to do is it's going to print that invoice using that template that I showed you earlier, and it's going to attach it as an attachment to the list item. There we go, success. And if I let it refresh, there we go. So we've got the attachments, and if I look at the attachment, ta-da, we've got the invoice. And if you remember, this was a manual execution. I had to go to the actions, but I could have set this up to run off of some sort of trigger. Maybe the user clicked the checkbox that said, okay, go make me an invoice, and it's going to do that. Or maybe it's going to run every night at midnight. We can also do actions like that. Okay, so we've got the attachment with the invoice, and now we're ready to send it to our customer. But before we can do that, we really want to get that manager approval. So if we go to edit this item, now it's time for the manager to come in and approve this. So this is a very simple Infowise field called an Infowise approval field. In this case, I've told it that I'd like the users to draw their signature, but you could just do this with a simple button click if you wanted to. Okay, so what you're going to see here is I've added the manager signature. After I save it, it's going to essentially approve this invoice. And then it's going to open up the option for us to send the email. So this is sort of an interlock to make sure the users weren't sending the email without the manager approval. There we go. So now I have the option to send an email. So using another Infowise feature called Infowise Alerts, what we did was set up a trigger previously that watched for that checkbox, and once it's been checked, it sends an email to the customer with the attached document, which is the invoice, and says, hey, it's time to pay your invoice. So just to take a look at that, from our list we can go to the Add Alert. This is the Infowise Alerts here. And this is sort of our configuration screen for the email alerts. Again, it's all done straight from the user interface. There is no custom coding with SharePoint Designer or anything like that. So we don't have too much time left, but I'll show you how to make this email invoice just to show you how easy it is. So first up, we tell it what recipients to go to. In this case, we want to send it to a column, which is the contact email. So rather than specifying a certain fixed to, we're going to send it to whatever customer was selected when they selected the invoice. Great. Okay, so now that was the who it's getting it, and now we have what to send. Essentially, this is when do you send the item. So I want to send it when the item is modified. And we had that checkbox, and that was called send email. So what I'm going to do here is just add a very simple condition that says send the item after that checkbox has been checked. Or I guess I should say after the checkbox has been checked. There we go. Okay, so now we've set up a trigger to send that email after somebody checked this checkbox. We have when to send. We could choose to send it immediately or at midnight if you'd like to. And then finally we can set up mail templates. And just like the rest of this is all very simple to set up. I have a template here called invoice notification. And here you can see there's just some basic text in there. But the nice part is I could actually add list columns. So let's say I wanted to say, hello customer name. So I could say customer contact name, and I could add that to the body. And that's going to be a dynamic field based on the list value. There we go. Okay, and additionally, I'm going to tell it down here that I'd like to insert the attachment. So previously we created that invoice as an attachment PDF. Now we're going to send that invoice along with the email to the customer. Okay, so now I just choose my invoice notification template, and I add my new rule. There we go, I've got the rule added, so now it should actually be active. If I were to go as a user, edit my invoice and say send the email, it's actually going to send the email to the customer with that attachment. Cool. Okay, so that was a really simple workflow process using all of the Infowise product suite. There's plenty of other stuff to show you as well. So here's an example of Infowise chart, another chart. So here we can take list data and chart it based on all sorts of different fields, all sorts of different chart types. So for example, in this case, all of those line items that we added, we're tracking those by the week that they were that they occurred, and then how much money we're charging for each of those. So we can sort of track our revenue by week. Or maybe we want to see what our most prolific customer is. Here we are, Wiseco apparently has 4 invoices, whereas the other 2 have less invoices. So that's an example of how you can use some of the other Infowise products for charting.
Garrett, while you're there, I'm noticing that you're showing this on Office 365. Not sure if you clarified that. I know that there was a couple questions in there. Is it cloud only, or is this also available on-prem?
No, this is absolutely available on-prem as well. In fact, if you go to our website, you can get a free trial, and you just tell it whether you want to do the Office 365 or the on-prem. For Office 365, you download the app yourself, and you can upload it to your tenant. For on-premises, we'll get back to you with the installation instructions. But all the features work on both products. It's really a great tool.
And which versions of SharePoint do you support?
So we support back to 2010, maybe even earlier, 2007. I think Vladi will have to get back to us on that one. I think if you're curious, go ahead and ask a question, and we'll get back to you with that. But yeah, anything that you guys are running, we should be supporting as well. If you'd like, of course, feel free to schedule a demo. We can take you through some of the other features, maybe tell us a little bit about what sort of things you're trying to do with the product, and we can show you how to do it. There's also, of course, training, lots of self-paced training. We also offer like a 4-hour training course if you want to get started with the product. So that's it.
Hey, thanks a lot, Garrett. We actually have a number of questions across both sides of both amongst the Flow product as well as the Infowise solutions we saw today. So I'm just going to go ahead and open this back up and just kind of flip it back to our contact info while we are answering the questions. Yeah, another photo from Papua New Guinea, where I was a couple weeks ago. So the first question is, does Flow only work in Office 365? And the answer to that is Flow currently is cloud only, but the roadmap will include SharePoint on-premises. So if you're playing with the new preview, yeah, it's primarily for online today. Next question is around PowerApps. Is PowerApps used for mobile only, or will it also be available for on-prems? So the first question around mobile is it's mobile devices and tablets, and the answer that is correct. It's primarily around that mobile scenario of phones and tablets, but it will be something available on your list as well. Again, that's in the roadmap. Will it be available on-premise? Again, this is something that's cloud first, but will be available for SharePoint 2016 in a feature update in the future. Another question around Flow. Can we sequence different external services actions, like when a list item is added, first do something at MailChimp and then after upload to Dropbox? As I understand it, it's really you're picking two things. So if you want it to do a third thing, you're probably going to build it based on the second thing to then the third thing. So they may end up being a couple. But I think it probably, today, it depends on if you're creating from scratch or if you're using a template. All your templates are going to be primarily just two things, like if this, then do that. But it wouldn't surprise me as well if it's have an approval and then add the item to Dropbox. But if we're talking about SharePoint to MailChimp to Dropbox, I think we're talking about probably two different flows. The next question is around Infowise. I'll let you answer this, Garrett.
Sure.
Is Infowise always list-based? Can it store the data in a document?
Okay, so Infowise is primarily based on lists, but we also have all the features for document libraries. So if you were trying to automate processes with documents and you had them in a document library, you could use Infowise actions to manipulate those documents if you would. On the other side of this question, could you store the data in a document? Well, like I showed you, you could print the data and store that into a document library. So essentially you could, if you wanted to, create a snapshot of the list and put it in a library if you wanted to.
And there was one around cost. How do you guys do your pricing? Is it server-based? Is it user-based?
That's something I think we cover on our, ooh, there is a sales thing. I don't know if maybe I'll let Vladi, our technical manager, cover that answer. It is based on servers, I know. I think you can also get it by
Sure.
site if you wanted to do a sort of limited Office 365 version as well.
Yeah, and I assume a lot of those kinds of questions, they're going to want you to, Infowise is going to want you to just reach out to them to explain your situation. Yeah.
Yeah, by all means, please do.
Yeah. Is Infowise Forms only, or SharePoint, could it do some back office stuff with QuickBooks?
So Infowise is primarily forms only. We do have some integration with SQL databases, so theoretically you could manipulate outside applications with Infowise. However, it's not going to be quite as pretty as Flow would be.
Mm-hmm. There was another question around what about LinkedIn for Flow? So that's a great question. I would recommend you go to flow.microsoft.com. Essentially, you can see what the services are. They've got 35, and they're adding more. Is LinkedIn there today? I'm not sure if LinkedIn's in there, but if it isn't, since Twitter is, it wouldn't surprise me if LinkedIn makes its way in there as well. A question about the demo, was that video on YouTube? The answer is yes. That little snippet we saw does actually come out of one of those videos, that Office Mechanic YouTube series that basically came out of the future of SharePoint. I just wanted to show you that demo, and unfortunately, basically it's a snippet out of a YouTube video. A lot of people asked about if the fact is there a recording of this. Yes, it was recorded, and it will be available on the infowisesolutions.com/webinars.aspx. So basically all the webinar recording will be on there. And if there's any other questions, I think that's it. Thanks a lot for joining us today. Appreciated your questions. You've got my contact info up there. Feel free to tweet me or connect to me on LinkedIn. You've even got my email. And thanks again. Thank you. Thanks, Garrett.
Thank you, Joel. Thank all of you too.
Yeah. Bye.